Okay, so let's go through a little bit of rendering. You didn't need to buy any rendering supplies for this class, but if you did, or if you have some supplies on hand, that's totally fine. If you end up not rendering, which means coloring, once we get to college level, we can't say coloring anymore. Otherwise, our students' parents begin to wonder, didn't you learn that in kindergarten? So professionals call it rendering. You don't have to on your garden plan, that's completely fine, but it's often a fun way to finish your design. And if you're designing for someone else, color really does help the drawing to read clearly. So if you've got good black and white graphics to start with, black and white should still be beautiful on its own, and color just adds and makes it better, right? But you should never rely on color to carry a drawing, because if you're passing off a design to be installed, most building teams that get copies of that plan, they don't get color copies, right? So it's too expensive to do it that way. So it still has to be readable in black and white. If you do nice ink work here, that makes rendering much easier. So in terms of rendering, I'm just going to do colored pencil because it's much more forgiving than the markers. If there are some of you who have these markers, or who bought a few markers, or just want to see a demo, maybe just email me and I can upload another video, right? So one of the first things you need to know is any drawing, really good rendering, should have 7 colors, right? If you want to run out now and buy like crayons or colored pencils, you really only need these 4, a red, an orange, a yellow, a green, a blue, a purple, and a black, right? But I like to have a little bit more variety, and drawings will look better the more layers you have. So I like a little more flexibility, so I have a light red and a dark red. I have a range of oranges. I'm just going to use 2 for today. I've got a range of yellows, like a lemon yellow and a canary yellow. Of course, I have a range of greens. I like starting with the spring green, and then I love this darker green. This one in the middle, let's see what color it is. It's just called green. It's kind of a weird shade of green. It's not a shade of green you'd ever find in nature, but sometimes I'll use that. And then I have a range of blues, including one that is almost black. And then I have a couple purples, and then I have, the black one, right? And I have like many more colored pencils, but these are the ones I use most commonly. So you really only need to get no more than this many. In fact, a lot of students who buy the giant packs, they often have like rendering paralysis because there's too many choices. And you'll actually be able to do a better drawing and do it quicker if you have fewer choices. So sometimes I recommend just get the 7, right? You can get a lot of different shades out of just the 7. All right, so I drew up a little plan here. And one of the first questions I'm always asked is, if you have a tree in your design, do you render the tree or what's underneath it, these shrubs that are coming up underneath it, or do you render both? Both is a kind of a tall order because then it starts to get really muddy in here. We need to be able to see through this canopy to see what's underneath. So if you decide to render the tree, then I would do it pretty lightly so we can still see the nice ink work underneath. A lot of times what I'll suggest is, if this tree is existing, but everything that's underneath is what you're proposing, render that, because that's where you want the attention of a drawing. We need to know this is here, but your proposed idea is what's underneath. So I would render that. If the tree is a critical component, maybe you render that, and you render the rest of the shrubs, but then you don't render the shrubs that are under that canopy, right? So that's however you want to do it is completely fine. I probably won't render the tree today, just because that's a bigger symbol and it takes longer to render. So I'll just come underneath. So let's see. I haven't done a practice one of these, so I'm kind of thinking as we go. So a lot of times I'll start with my green, and a principle that you want to use is color repeat, right? So if I use this green here, I need to use it elsewhere on the drawing somewhere, because that's what will tie the drawing together. And one of the things you also need to consider is where the light is coming from. So let's just say, so you need to know which side your shadows are going to be on. So let's say light is coming from this way. Sorry, it's very light, I did use my black. Let's say the light is coming from this way. So that means all my shadows will be on this lower right side, right? So I don't really care which way is north when I'm doing a rendering. In terms of graphically, shadows and shading looks better when it's on the bottom of the plant, otherwise the drawing looks top heavy. So I will do it on the bottom right. So that means my marks will be lightest on the top left, and they get darker and darker as I get to the bottom right. And I'll do that because I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, you might want to switch it up and have the upper right be the lightest part, and then the bottom left be the darkest part, in which case you would change up your inking as well, right? So what I will first do is, knowing that the light source is here, most of the light would be hitting this, and we're ignoring the tree for a second. And so I'm going to do my green really, really lightly, right? And with colored pencil, you want all your strokes going the same way most of the time. When we tackle the grasses, I'll show you something different. And I want to do a really, really light touch. And I'm going quickly. I'm not worried about the exact edges. If I go over, not a big deal. If I don't quite get to the edge, not a big deal. And I might come in and say, all right, I'm just going to get a base layer of green down on everything. My students don't trust me that this is like the quickest way to do things, but again, with the color repeat, you want this green elsewhere in the drawing, so I'm going to take my shrubs and I'm going to do this lower green. Now, and I don't know what anything is on this plan, so for this first one, I'm thinking it's an evergreen because of the way I drew the leaves. So then I come back in with a second pass, right? And you can see that just getting a little bit of color down looks great, right? Because again, when your ink work is beautiful, you don't need a lot of color. So if I just stopped at this very light touch of a green, that looks awesome. And maybe that's all I do for those plants. But if I've got more time, I can come in and now I'm using the same green that I started with, and I'm just going over, say, the bottom 2/3 of that plant a little bit heavier, right? And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to start adding some other greens. So I'm going to take, this is the, okay, there isn't the color on here, but anyway, it's a slightly darker green. Really subtle, right? And I'm going to do it on the bottom third, but I'm going to bear down really hard, right? So now it's like, wow, that's looking really cool, because now we're creating this 3D effect. And I might come in and I'll add a little more of that first green and I'll bring it up just a hair more. See what I mean? The color pencil is very forgiving, right? And so maybe I'll just stop there, right? So now let's come over to this needle evergreen, and I typically will show those darker. So maybe I start with the darker green that I used on this one, right? And I'm going to do that for most of the plant except for like that top upper left. And again, all my pencil strokes go the same way. So I do, I leave my little light spot, and now I'm going to use the same green, and I'm just going to bear down a little bit harder to get to the rest. And then I'm going to take the darkest green that I have and really, really lightly start to add that in. And again, I've dropped it down, so I want to see the light space, the first green, the second green, but I want them to feather together really nicely. I don't want to see obvious bands of different shading, right? So that's why color pencil's really forgiving. So I want this to be substantially darker than this one at the end. So I might come in and say, okay, well, I'm liking that, and maybe I just leave it like this. I can always, add and change later, but let's just say I want to make that a little more feathered. And then I can, I'm going to grab this weird blue. This is ultramarine blue. And I'm going to use that just along the very edge of my shadow side. So the very lower right side. And so now that pops out from the page, right? Pretty cool. Now, these guys are the same plant. And so I want them to look a little bit different, but I want things to start gelling together. Sorry, I'm very OCD. I like all my things organized on my desk. My students make fun of me in a friendly way, and I will rearrange their desks when they're not in the studio. But that's just me. All right. So I want these to be different, but I want them to also start gelling with the rest. So, and it's just a shrub. Again, I don't know what kind yet, so I might just come in and say, just for starters, I'm going to just take that second green, and I'm kind of doing a middle range bearing down this, and I'm still leaving my light spot, leaving a light spot on this one, and you can see how fast I'm going, right? I'm staying within the boundaries, but I don't need to draw like this and be really careful, right? It's going to look the same whether you do it really slow or really fast, right? All right, so that's looking pretty good. I've got my light spot, I have some dark spots, so now I need to graduate it a little bit more and make it darker on this side. So what could we use? I don't want it to get too dark because this is going to be a really dense rendering just because there's already a lot of ink here, so I want to keep it fairly light. So maybe I'll come in and I'll hit that bright spot with some yellow to make it different than this guy. And then let's darken it up a little bit with maybe this weird green. Oh, something's wrong with this. Maybe it's just super old and I don't use it a lot. It doesn't really want to put down a lot of color. All right, I'm going to throw this one out. This is not working. See, now I'm getting frustrated. You can tell in my renderings, like my strokes aren't the same. We don't want to see the individual strokes, right? So they should kind of come together. All right, I'm going to throw this one out. So let's come in and use, let's actually come in and use like another blue. No, so I'm just going to go back to this other darker green. Sorry, this is me thinking on the fly. All right, so now it's looking a little bit like that one, but the symbol is different, so it's not a big deal. And again, I might come back in and fix it a little bit. I don't like, I got a little bright there with not a lot of gradation between that yellow and the next green. So what I might do is come in with that middle green and just darken it between the light, between the dark. And I'll take my light one and I'm going to just soften that yellow a little bit. See, it's very forgiving. Right? If you don't like the way something is coming out, I don't know if you watched the Mike Lynn video that I posted a couple weeks ago, but he's like, if you don't like it, just keep working. Just keep working the drawing. Or if someone comes by and says, that drawing looks terrible, just say, I'm not done yet. Now, bugger off. All right. So now we're down to these grasses. So I'm going to hit them with a little bit of green, but super lightly. And obviously super quickly, right? Now let's just say there's something like a little blue stem, and let's pick up that blue. So here's where the pencil stroke doesn't go the same way. This is where you want to follow the pen strokes that you made, right? So when I did this pen symbol, let me just quickly draw a circle so you can see. Oops. It's an oval because my circle template moved. All right, so when I did this grass symbol, I started, let me move this really quickly so you can see. There it is. So when I did this symbol, all my pen strokes go to the middle of the circle, right? And I just keep going back and forth, but it always comes to the middle. And I go around and around, and as I do that, like the center will get much darker. And that's how a grass would look, right? So, but you need the circle template to kind of keep your strokes the same. But if I, did that and I just did, something like this, it looks really sloppy, obviously. So you want to have it always come to the middle, right? So that's how I created all of these. Let's see if I can get this set back up. Okay, good beans. All right, so now I'm taking, hopefully this is what I started with. So now I'm doing the colored pencil, and I'm following the same pen strokes that I used, right? So it's going through to the middle. I'm still pretty light-handed when I do this. I'm not bearing down really hard because I'm going to add some other layers perhaps, and I want to give myself room to do that. And you can see I'm also leaving some white space. You can overwork a drawing by obliterating all white space, and that's what gives a drawing life and lightness. All right, so I've got some grass there. Let me try adding a few. Wait, is this the same blue that I used? It looks the same. Let's do this. Coming in with just a couple darker ones. Again, that makes it kind of jump out a little bit. Okay, that looks pretty cool. Then we're coming down to what must be a perennial. So let's do, like, repeating a yellow is a good place to start. So again, I'm just going to quickly cover the whole mass lightly with a yellow. And that starts to tie together the yellow that I've already used. And then I'm going to take my light orange and I'm going to fairly lightly also, but now I'm looking at the individual cluster. So it's a massing of plants, but you can show each one. You can see each one. So I'm going to leave a little bit of yellow at the upper left and lightly fill in my orange every place else. Pretty light-handedly. But again, moving quickly, right? And so you can see there's a little bit of yellow left, and that shows like light hitting it. Now I might come in and using the same orange, darken up like the lower third. Now I'm going to take my darker orange and I'm going to do a little bit less than the lower third, pretty much right along the edge. And so now that's giving that symbol some depth. And then I haven't used my red yet, so now I might come in and just at the very, very edge, I'm going to add a little bit of red. And it might not be, very perceptible. Is that a word? I think so. But it's enough, and it really helps makes that jump out. And so that looks okay. It's a little harsh. You can see the different layers, so I might come back with my lighter orange and just kind of soften that up a little bit. And so I'm just bearing down a little bit more on the dark side and then lightening, making it another light pass at the tops because I still want that yellow to show through. I don't want to obliterate it all, but that looks a little bit better. I like that. So now it seems to still be missing something. It looks good, but if you look at the color choices, have you used, all 7? No, I haven't really put in any purple, have I? So now it's like, okay, where can I put in some purple to jazz it up? And maybe, let's see, maybe I'll come into this middle shrub and I'm going to use that on the darker side. And again, it's really subtle, but it doesn't look a whole lot different, but your brain might be going, oh yeah, that's the ticket. That's the ticket. Okay, so you can see some of my pen strokes. I don't like that, so let me soften that up a little bit, feathering it up into the green a little bit more. And sometimes if you think, oh, I brought the darkness up a little too high, which often happens. It kind of destroys the shadow and the 3D quality. There's an easy fix. You just need to come in with a darker color and add the darkest layer at the very, very bottom right. All right, so I think that helps with the shadow, but I still don't like what's going on the disconnect, or the harshness between here and here. We need a little more gradation. So was it this green? So I'm just going to come back in now with a little bit heavier hand and try to blend that purple and the green. Again, not obliterating my light space up there. And then maybe, okay, I'm going to come in and see if I have like a darker purple. Is that purple? It also helped if I started to render with my glasses, but everything is just a guess. I'm going to make it a little bit darker. All right, so that's looking better. I like that. And so I'm fixing it by going darker here, going a little bit lighter, trying to blend a little bit better. Okay, so I'm bearing down really hard at the end, and then I'm getting a little bit lighter here. So that looks pretty interesting. So now the only thing that looks odd is this guy, right? Because there's like quite a few layers on the rest of these, and there's not that many layers on that one. So not to overwork the drawing a little bit, I might come in and do a little bit of this darker green on this one. And it's okay that I haven't, you know, touched these with colors. It doesn't matter. Our brain fills it in. Okay. So that looks pretty interesting. It's got all the colors on there. I've used red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. So they're all in there. I didn't use black, but the blue is so dark. That's okay. If I wanted to come in now and do shadows, you could. So you could come in and do, is this blue or black? See, this is blue again. I do this all the time. They look the same to me. But actually a blue shadow is pretty cool too. But you could come in and add shadows now if you wanted to. But they're very easy to get wrong. So just by having the shadow within the plant showing the 3D effect here, that's fine. But if you wanted to, you know, you change up the size, and they should only come off of where your plant symbol is darkest, right? So again, for me, it's the bottom right. And so this is a short guy, so the shadow is shorter. This is taller, so the shadow's a little bit bigger. If this was a really tall grass, you know, you could actually, you know, make it like this. It just starts to get the drawing a little confusing though if you make really big shadows. And then I might come in and just do, you know, some shadows here. But you're often better off leaving off the shadows. But and so now I messed up my drawing, but imagine it without the shadows, right? So that is how you lay your colors. If you decided at the end, hey, that looks really cool, but now that tree looks weird because it's not rendered, you could come in and render it, but I would just say just do it super, super lightly so the rendering of the shrubs underneath still comes through. And maybe you ignore the light in the dark side, and you just want to say, hey, I'm just showing that there's another thing of mass here, but I still want my shrubs underneath to come through. So there you have it. Have fun and good luck.